Additional aids and services are available to individuals with disabilities. To make such a request, please contact us by email, by clicking the Help tab in the PD portal, or at pdportal@tamu.edu, by phone, including Relay Texas at 1-800-441-7323, or in writing to Train PD, PD Portal Support, 4477 TAMU, College Station, Texas 77843. Both a transcript and accessible document of the content presented in this webinar can be found as resources in the course description. Click on the blue links under Course Resources in the description. When a link is clicked, a new browser window will open.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Workforce Wednesday. You are here for Give It To Me Straight. What's up with immigration law? Today, we have Victoria Hinojosa and Anastasia Tristan. Our first presenter is Victoria Hinojosa, and she has a passion for helping people find their professional paths and has spent 10 years assisting individuals with job preparation and career exploration. She spent over 8 years working for the Career Services Office at Texas State University, not only helping college students prepare for professional jobs, but also creating professional development opportunities for student worker staff under her supervision. So in her current role as a college navigator for Workforce Solutions, she works closely with adult education literacy programs in Houston-Galveston region to create presentations and workshops to assist AEL students in mastering the English language and preparing for job search and finding their career path. So she is a graduate of Texas State University with a BA in Mass Communication. So welcome, Victoria Hinojosa. We also have Anastasia Tristan. And Anastasia is a native Houstonian who is a college graduate from Sweetbriar College with a degree in political science. She's recently joined the Workforce Solution regional team as a college navigator. She is community-oriented and has a passion for bridging the gap between resources and individuals experiencing adversities. She aspires to one day run for president of the United States. So welcome, Victoria and Anastasia, and take it away.
Hey, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Olga, for that great introduction. Welcome to Workforce Wednesday. Give it to me straight. What's up with immigration law? I'm Victoria Hinojosa. I'm a college navigator with Workforce Solutions in the Houston-Galveston area. And presenting with me today is my new colleague, Miss Anastasia Tristan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anastasia Tristan. Thank you so much for being here, and we're so excited to present today with you all.
So just to give you a little note, the immigration policy can change very quickly, and we've got a special guest speaker that's going to be with us who will explain all that to you. So just for the purpose of this recording, we just want you to know that unfortunately what we talk about today could change 6 months from now, could even change sooner than that, apparently. Tomorrow, it could change tomorrow. So just an FYI, that's the nature of the immigration law. It is constantly changing.
Josephine Sogwe is the managing attorney for Baker Ripley's Immigration and Citizenship Program. Josephine completed her undergraduate studies at Texas A&M University, where she earned a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science. After completing her undergraduate studies, she attended the University of Houston Law Center, where she received her Doctor of Jurisprudence from 2015 to 2021. Josephine worked as a clinical supervising attorney at the University of Houston Law Center Immigration Clinic. Currently, Josephine works with a robust team of attorneys, DOJ accredited representatives, social workers, and immigration specialists to provide pro bono legal services to immigrants in the greater Houston area. In addition, she provides direct pro bono legal representation to immigrant victims of crime, domestic violence, and human trafficking. Josephine has always had a passion for people from diverse places and for helping those in need. Thus, she thoroughly enjoys representing each of the immigrants who walk through their doors.
Once you're a citizen, you cannot lose your citizenship status. Is that true or false?
Unfortunately, it is false.
Because when you are a citizen, if you become a naturalized citizen of the United States, that is, you were born outside of the United States, and then you go through the citizenship process and become a citizen, you could potentially lose that citizenship. It's a process called denaturalization. So it is possible, meaning that the answer is false, but it's kind of confusing one, right?
Under what grounds can that happen?
Usually it's going to be fraud. If they find that there was fraud involved in your application for citizenship. It's not common, but it is something that it's possible.
Okay, because I was like, holy cow, does that mean, are we not safe as citizens?
Yeah. And then, of course, that's not the same for if you were born in the United States. The only way you could lose your citizenship is if you were to renounce your citizenship.
Okay. Phew. All right.
If you are a citizen, your spouse can automatically become a green card holder. True or false? It is not an automatic process. I would wish it were, but it's not an automatic process. So if you're a citizen, you can file a petition for your spouse to be able to get their green card, but it is not automatic in any way, shape, or form. And in some ways, it can be possible, for instance, if someone was even just a green card holder, to potentially lose their green card status if there was some issues wrong there. So it is false.
Was it ever automatic, or has it always been you have to petition?
There's always been some sort of petition process, but the petition process has become more strenuous in current years. Mm-hmm.
You can present yourself at the border and obtain asylum. True or false?
The answer is false. You can present yourself at the border and request for asylum. However, you're not guaranteed in any way, shape, or form to obtain it. So you can make that request, but you will not immediately get asylum. In fact, if you enter the United States without documentation and you then request asylum, most likely you will be placed in a detention facility for a period of time.
From that, my first question to you, Josephine, is what is the right way to immigrate into the U.S.? We hear so much about how many people are illegally coming in, trying to cross the border, trying to climb that huge wall now. They're trying to sneak into the country. So what is the right way for someone to immigrate into the U.S.?
I love this question because the answer is going to depend on what time you're talking about, what period of time in the United States. Because if we go back to 1790, in order to immigrate into the United States, they weren't even taking record of who was coming into the country in the 1700s and before that. They started taking record of who was coming into the country in 1802. It was in 1790 that we have the first Naturalization Act, where it talked about how you could become a citizen. At that time in 1790, in order to become a citizen, you simply needed to, of course, one, be a free white person, but then in addition to that, be a person of good moral character and have resided in the United States for 2 years. That was it. There was nothing else that you needed to have other than those things. So I think it's interesting. And this question is very interesting to me because it's a reflective moment for a lot of us, especially for me. I am the child of immigrants. And I know that the way my parents were able to come into the United States, most likely right now, and my parents came in the 70s and 80s respectively, they wouldn't have been able to come that way right now. So when we start talking about, the right way, and people aren't doing it the right way, I think we need to sometimes be humble and realize that for those of us who are the descendants of immigrants, that a lot of our ancestors would not have been able to come into the United States with the current regulations. Either they wouldn't have been able to come, or the process would have been incredibly delayed.
Right. So now the process obviously is really difficult to get into the country.
It is. The process is difficult. I've been practicing for close to a decade now. And even in the amount of time that I've been practicing, I've seen the applications double in size. I've seen requirements change. I've seen fees go up. I've seen how there are some applications that had a 6-month processing time when I first started practicing, now have about a 10-year processing time. Things are much more difficult. So in terms of the right way, yes, we're talking about people who are either entering the country with visas or people who are here in the United States and going through a process to become green card holders and citizens, but just know that that process is much more difficult than it was before. And that for the vast majority
majority of the history of the United States, the process of coming into the country was much easier than it is presently. In the past, I would say 20 years.
Back in the 80s, it was so much easier. During the Reagan administration, it was so much easier to get in. And then when in the 90s, under President Clinton's administration, things got really tight, starting to tighten up. And then, of course, I would imagine after 9/11, things got really, really tight. And now it's just crazy.
It is. The wait time for applications to the United States is the same for all countries. True or false?
It is false. The wait time for applications for the United States, it's not the same. It's going to be different for different countries. Something in particular, when we start talking about people who are trying to petition through a family member, that process is going to be dependent, that and employment-based applications are dependent on the number of people who are here in the country already from that population. And so some countries like Mexico, the Philippines, China, we see they have extended wait times that are far greater than the wait times for other countries. So you all are correct that the wait time is not going to be the same for all countries.
And is there any rhyme or reason for that?
So yes, they do it. It's a matter of percentages, and they call it the countries that have a longer wait time. They call them oversubscribed countries. So that's based on the number of people who are currently in the country, and it's percentages. There's a lot of math. I'm a lawyer. I don't do that. But essentially, though, it's based on the percentage of people who are currently here in the United States from those countries. And if a country is considered oversubscribed, then those countries are going to have longer wait times.
So the application to come to the country from your home country can be upwards of what, 20, 30 years?
It's going to depend on the type of application. And I don't want to get too technical right now.
Okay, got
it. But it is going to depend on what type of application is being sent, who is the person who petitioned for you, and then which country that you are coming from. But I'm looking at the current visa bulletin for February 2023. The visa bulletin is basically, think about when you go to a meat market or a bread market and they give you a ticket number and they say, this is your number, and when we call your number, you can come. That's the way the visa bulletin works. When they call your date, you are then essentially able to get a green card or be able to do that application. So right now we see the longest wait times are for the siblings of people from the Philippines, Mexico, and India. So right now for Mexico, if you have a US citizen sibling who is petitioning for you, that's going to take about 23 years. For the Philippines, 21 years. For India, we are looking at about 18.
Since the wait time varies depending on where you're from, and as you spoke about the ways entering to the United States, it may seem that there is a pool of what immigration can stem from. So, I mean, we're all curious to know, what are the 3 different areas of immigration?
Immigration is incredibly complicated. A federal justice was able to say that the only area of law that he believed was more complicated than immigration was tax law. Tax law, at least to my knowledge, doesn't change as much as immigration does. Immigration literally can change every single day, and it is very dependent on the administration. So the priorities and the agenda of whichever administration is in charge, that affects immigration, because immigration is under the executive branch. So ladies and gentlemen, how many branches of government do we have?
We have 3.
And it's legislative, executive, and the judicial branch. Immigration is not under the judicial branch. It's actually under the executive branch, which is a surprise, I think, to quite a few people because it is law, but it is the executive branch. And so the person who's in charge of the executive branch is the president. And so that's why there's that flip. So I like to just talk about 3 different areas of immigration, but that is the most generic way to boil it down. And so the 3 different areas we'd be talking about would be business immigration, family immigration, and humanitarian immigration. Business immigration, that's going to be those who are immigrating to the United States based on their relationship with an employer. like an oil company decides to file a petition for somebody, that's going to be how they would be able to come into the United States. Also, those with extraordinary abilities, think singers, ballerinas, professors, scientists, those types of people, they could potentially be able to come in under business immigration. You also have family immigration. Family immigration is going to be for those who are coming to the United States based on their relationship to a family member. So if you have a qualifying relationship, unfortunately, it does not mean all family members. Sometimes people ask, what about my grandmother? What about my cousin? Unfortunately, you can't do that. There are some, I believe Canada, a grandmother could petition, not in the United States. We're only talking about parents, children, and in some cases, siblings. And all of those, there are certain rules about if they're a permanent resident or if they're a citizen and how old they can be if they can petition for you. So lots of rules there. Again, don't want to get into the weeds of it, but just knowing that there is that relationship. If you have a familial relationship with someone who has a certain type of status, they potentially might be able to do that for you. And the last is where I reside. That's humanitarian immigration. So I like to think of this as like the heart of immigration. So humanitarian immigration, we're talking about people who have fled their home country as a result of persecution, for people who were the victims of crime here in the United States. We have the U visa and the T visa. The U visa is for those who are the victims of crime in the United States. The T visa is for those who were the victims of trafficking in the United States. If you were trafficked into the United States, then you could be able to get the T visa. For the U visa, if you were the victim of a crime here in the US and you were also helpful in the investigation of the crime, then you would be able to apply for the U visa. You're not guaranteed to get it. And that's the one where right now we're looking at about a 7-year wait list. I literally 7 years ago applied for a U visa for a client and they just got it yesterday.
Is it because everything is so backed up, or is it really, again, just based on what the current laws are?
It's a combination of both. With the U visa, for instance, they only allowed 10,000 of them to be approved each year. They've since increased it, but for the longest time, it was only 10,000, meaning once they reached that cap, they weren't able to give any more. So for different instances like that, the laws and just different policies would prevent that. But then you also have a backlog. There are, for instance, in the immigration court, we currently have about 2 million cases that are in the backlog for immigration court, for example. And so because of that, that does make the wait time quite lengthy in those types of cases.
What if there's a case of domestic violence?
There's something called VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act. For some of you who are in different interdisciplinary areas, you might have heard of VAWA because VAWA is not only for immigration, it's for a variety of areas. What happened is that in the 90s, Congress was able to see that domestic violence was a problem nationwide and that there needed to be this holistic interdisciplinary approach to attacking it and being able to help people in the United States. And so that's how VAWA, Violence Against Women Act, was born. And what this is you have police officers and social services and counselors, and then also immigration having certain laws that would be able to help people. So with VAWA specifically, it is for those who have been the victims or have survived domestic abuse if they have certain qualifying relationships. Because just before I mentioned how in the past you would have, let's say a spouse in a healthy relationship, a spouse would do a petition for their spouse because they love their spouse and they want their spouse to be with them, right? Mm-hmm. Well, if you have an abusive relationship, that's not what's going to happen, right? They might instead use immigration status as a way to control the individual. And so with VAWA, it allows the person to not have to rely on that spouse, parent, or child who is being abusive, and instead they can do what is called a self-petition, so to petition on their own for status.
What about education or student visas?
When we start talking about student visas, those typically get lumped in with employment visas because it's more so based on your status with a certain entity as opposed to your status with a person. When we talk about it as generally as this, it typically is going to go under employment. So a lot of times, most of your nonprofit organizations do not do student visas and don't do those types of applications because it's not considered to be humanitarian immigration.
There's another category
Yes.
within humanitarian, right?
Yes.
Yes, and this is a big one. So there's SIJ, so it's special immigrant juveniles. Those are children who have either been abandoned, abused, or neglected by one or both of their parents. This is something that I think is not as common. We don't hear it as often in the news, but it is an area. And what it is that you're able to help these kids who have come into the country without anyone, or maybe they had an abusive parent, and they are able to get this SIJ status, and then they're able to apply for permanent residency.
I've also heard about parents send their children, their teenagers or their kids across the border saying, you'll get help in America. There's nothing we can do for you here. Is that true? Are you seeing that?
So we do see people who from specifically the Northern Triangle. So Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. Those are the countries that we see the greatest numbers of people coming in from those places. And as a result of a lot of the gang violence that is happening in those countries, there are some people who have, yes, sent their children to come to the United States without someone. Potentially, some of those kids could be able to get this SIJ status, but they would have to be able to show that one of their parents has either abandoned, abused, or neglected them. They would have to show that. So some of those children might be able to get help with SIJ, but not all, because some of them have great relationships with both of their parents, which is really exciting, right? We want people to have good relationships with their parents, but the thing is that especially in our area of humanitarian immigration, when things are good, that doesn't help your case.
I know there's a lot of question, a lot of buzz, especially here in the Houston area about asylum.
You could honestly say it's probably one of the biggest areas. It's definitely the biggest area in humanitarian immigration, but it's something that there's a lot of controversy about asylum and how we are going to welcome people who are coming into the country who are persecuted or claim to be persecuted in their home countries. So asylum is for those who have been persecuted in their countries, either in the past or they have a fear of being persecuted in the future. This persecution needs to be based on one of 5 things. A lot of times people talk about, oh, I want to seek political asylum. And yes, there is asylum based on political opinion, but it's not the only type of asylum. So you can seek asylum based on race, religion, national origin, political opinion, or what is called a membership in a particular social group. That last one might kind of sound a little fuzzy, and that's because it absolutely is. And this is where the lawyers get to lawyer and kind of have some fun because it's based on case law. So case law would say that these are particular groups that we say, yes, they're eligible for asylum. And you have to see if your client fits in one of those groups exactly, or to say this is an analogous or a similar case. And because of that, this person should be able to get asylum as well.
From what I understand about asylum is that if you're fleeing your country because of gang-related issues, can you receive asylum? Does that fall under that category?
So for the most part, a lot of the case law in terms of gang violence, it's against people who are seeking asylum for those reasons. In Spanish, gang is pandilla. So a lot of people will come to you and talk about the pandillas. And if that is the only reason, the likelihood that you are going to be able to get asylum because a gang tried to recruit you or a gang was persecuting your family, a lot of times the likelihood is very, very low because the case law is against those. So unfortunately, to your question, Victoria, when someone is coming to you and they have these horrific stories of how gangs have just completely done so much to destroy their lives and how they're persecuted and they know they will face certain death if they return, a lot of times the law doesn't back them up and you might not be able to get asylum for those cases.
Help us understand, what is the difference between refugees, asylum seekers, and then these parolees?
A lot of times when we are talking about people who are coming into the country and they fled some sort of persecution, a lot of times just colloquially, we typically say refugees. right? So they are a refugee. We have some refugees in our community. We have people who are seeking help in the United States. The thing is though, that the definition of a refugee, and when we're specifically talking about refugees in immigration law, we are talking about people who have gone through a background check and a process through the UNHCR, that's the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. So that process a lot of times takes about 2 years, in which they are vetted, they go through background checks, and then they come into the United States with that status. They come into the US with status, and it's a status of a refugee. They are, however, different from someone who comes to the United States, whether it be with a visa or without documentation. They present themselves at the border and they say, I would like to seek asylum. Even though they might be fleeing the same type of harm and the same type of persecution, the United States treats them very differently, because the refugee comes in with status and after a year can be able to apply for permanent residency. But for asylum seekers, they potentially could be immediately detained and then would have to go through a process, potentially might have to go through immigration court and years and years and years of litigation before they could be able to get asylum. In fact, in the Houston area, the Houston Immigration Court actually denies about 95% of the cases that are before them. So it's a very difficult road that a lot of asylum seekers have.
Anyone who entered the US with status can obtain a work permit. So true or false?
It is true. Unfortunately, you don't automatically get a work permit, and yet you need a work permit in order to work. You need work authorization in order to work. So this leaves quite a few people in limbo, because that means they either are simply not able to work, or what they end up doing is they do work that they get paid under the table. Right. And you can imagine that if you get paid under the table, that work a lot of times is not safe and is not protected. So it can be really problematic.
It does seem quite proceeding and even a challenge to get that status to have a work permit. So what about immigrants?
In order to get a work permit, you have to be under certain categories. If you don't fit into one of those categories, there is no way for you to be able to get a work permit. For tourist visas, you cannot work. If you are seeking asylum and you've applied for asylum, right now, the law says that it takes 150 days. So if your application has been pending for 150 days, then you can apply for a work permit. But the thing is right now, work permits are taking about 6 months in order to be processed. So by the time you do that 5 months of the pending time and the 6 months, you're talking about almost a year that the person might not be able to work.
A permanent resident status is permanent and cannot be changed. Is that true or false?
A permanent resident status is permanent and cannot be changed. That is false. If your permanent resident status is not permanent, it can absolutely be taken away. It could be that if you commit certain crimes in the United States, you may then end up in immigration court in deportation proceedings and potentially could be deported. Also, if you leave the United States for a lengthy amount of time, it is possible for them to come back and state that you have abandoned your permanent resident status.
Why does it take so long to obtain permanent residency?
Obtaining permanent residency is difficult and it's long for a number of reasons. Sometimes it might be because of the country of origin. Potentially, sometimes it's because of the backlog. And as a result of that, it can mean that sometimes you're waiting 1 year, 2 years after you filed your application here in the United States to be able to get a response. So it is a very difficult process. Also, I would say that the permanent resident application is probably the most complicated application that we have in immigration, even more complicated than the citizenship one. I think it's almost like gatekeeping purposes. So they do a lot of what they call inadmissibility checks to see if you are admissible into the country. There are literally currently on the application over 50 inadmissibility questions that you have to go through and answer. Ones that range from, are you a terrorist? Are you a Nazi persecutor in like the 30s and the 40s? Literally, that's still a question. If you've ever worked without work authorization, or if you entered the United States without permission.
What can be done to help change the stigma around immigration from a criminal activity to a humanitarian need?
I think it's interesting because in the criminal context, you actually have more rights than you do in the immigration context. So, on movies where they say the Miranda rights, you have a right to remain silent and all those different rights, those don't apply actually in the immigration context. So in immigration court, you do not have a right to assign counsel if you can't afford one. Those types of things are not immediately granted to you. The primary way to be able to change the stigma, I believe, is to be able to humanize immigrants and to realize that immigrants are people. Immigrants are people who live and breathe and smile and get mad and cry and want to have kids and want to have a future. And the same dreams of so many of the other immigrants who have come to the United States, those are the exact same dreams that people have. Primarily, we're seeing people come for two reasons. Either one, they are coming because they are fleeing persecution, or two, they want to live the American dream. They want to be able to have their chance at success. And unfortunately, it's much harder to get that chance currently than it has been in our nation's history.
We and the Houston-Galveston region, the College Career Navigators, we've developed our own podcast. We're developing content specifically for adult education and literacy. If you're interested, this QR code will take you directly to our YouTube channel.
We hope you enjoyed this pre-recorded webinar. After you have passed the final test with a score of 80% or greater and have received your certificate of completion, please take a few moments to complete the course evaluation. Participant feedback helps Train PD at TCAL continue to provide high-quality professional development. To leave a course feedback, please go to the completed portion of your transcript. To do this, hover over the My Learning tab and select View Your Transcript. Click on the drop-down arrow next to the word Active and select Completed. Then, click Evaluate in the drop-down menu next to the course you just completed. Please note that your feedback is greatly appreciated.